We will, I think, get started in the interest of trying to stay on time here. As you probably were notified as you logged in, we are recording this session, so it will be made available afterwards. We have configured the chat so that during the presentation, if you have questions that you would like to ask of our speakers, you can feel free to either save them for the end and verbalize them, or you can type them into the chat and we will read them at the end of the presentation. I know that we all have some amount of Zoom fatigue going on at this point. So certainly if you're someplace where you can't have your video on, or you don't have a camera on attached to your computer or whatever, that's all good. But we also love to see your faces. So I'm really happy to see you all today. And I hope that you'll consider keeping your camera on during the presentation. I know some places will shut off the camera for everybody, and I won't be doing that because I'm running the meeting. So there is that. I'm going to mute everyone for the presentation itself, and then we'll open it up again at the end so that you can ask your questions and whatnot. I think I have covered everything. So unless I get some sort of message from Priscilla or Gloria that I have not, I will go right ahead now and introduce Marianne Clyde, who is our chairperson of the Fauquier Chamber.
Well, hey, everybody. I'm excited to see you. I am so delighted that Scott has already announced that he's...
Oops, hold on just a second.
So
sorry.
Michelle just loves the fact that she could shut me up. So I just wanted to say, I was saying that I'm delighted that you're here. I am delighted that Scott has already announced that he's not scared of us. And that's, you know, what a guy. We're impressed. That's very cool. I'm looking forward to the presentation. But at first I wanted to say, you know, our Women's Business Council of the Fauquier Chamber has been around, gosh, is it 12 years now, Priscilla?
11.
11, okay, and that you and Gloria are among the founding members of it. I think you are the one that brought the genius idea to us, and we are forever grateful because our Women's Business Council has historically had the best attended programs, the best quality programs, the most engaging speakers. I mean, if you're in another committee or another council, just pretend you didn't hear that, but that's the truth. And the Women's Business Council has worked really hard to make that continually true. And so I am very grateful that, Priscilla, you brought this idea to Fauquier County. You have created such a wonderful program, and I am thrilled and excited to hear our speakers today. So with no further ado, I will present to you the chairman of the Women's Business Council, Priscilla Huddle.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for all the kind words. I'm delighted to welcome all of our participants today. We have folks coming from all over the state of Virginia. Adrian and Scott, we're just thrilled to have you with us. I would like to recognize our executive committee of the Women's Business Council. We have worked really hard this year to bring some great speakers to you and deal with everything else we're dealing with, lots of ups and downs, a few hiccups there and there, but here we are, and how great is this? But I'd like to recognize our executive committee, Liz Johnson, who is our co-chair of the Women's Business Council, doing a killer job on our advertising and press, Gloria Williams, chair of sponsorship, also doing an outstanding job dragging the sponsors in and just really rolling up our numbers. I'd like to thank Virginia Ward, our secretary, keeping track of us and keeping us on track. Caitlin Adkins, Dr. Ethel, two new members of our executive committee. Jan Sutton, she was here, had to leave. Dawn Watton, Sarah Yackel, who's also treasurer of the Fauquier Chamber, Marianne Clyde, of course, our illustrious chairman of the chamber, and talk about a tough and challenging job this year. She's doing it all. Elizabeth Rose, our vice chair of councils with the chamber, just a great set to have on the team. Lisa Burnside, and not least Michelle Coe, who I'm calling a new member, effective immediately, for jumping in and really helping us run the event today. We can't thank you enough. I also want to thank all of the Fauquier Chamber board members that have joined us today. And of course, a huge thank you to the chamber team. I saw Laura come on. She's the one who sent out the leaks, is doing the work. Thank you, Laura. The council was actually formed 11 years ago by a group of women. It's been an unbelievable team effort. So fortunate to work with such talented folks, but we are completely dedicated to the purpose with three main goals. One, to accelerate the advancement of women in business, be they entrepreneurs, women business owners, or leaders in corporations. Two, to identify and overcome barriers that block women from moving forward through targeted education and information-rich programs. And three, to increase executive networking proficiency and effectiveness by creating opportunities for women to put networking into action. And we are not just about women, we are about everyone, and we welcome participation from everyone. So again, thank you for joining us. I'd now like to introduce Gloria Williams, firm administrator of the law firm of Mark B. Williams and Associates, and our sponsorship chair, who has the great honor of recognizing our sponsors today. Gloria.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thank you all for joining us. And I really want to thank all our sponsors, because you've heard both Michelle and Priscilla talk about bringing you targeted programs, excellent speakers, and we could not do that without our sponsors. So please take a moment to listen and acknowledge any of these folks that you know who belong to these businesses if you get a chance. First, Alan Wayne Design Studio, Appleton Campbell, Ashwell and Ashwell, Atlantic Union Bank, Be the Change Foundation, Blazer Physical Therapy, Carmen Rivera State Farm Insurance, Country Chevrolet, Discovery Publications, Fauquier Health, Fauquier Times, Genesis Home Improvement, Golden Rule Builders, Gulick, Carson and Thorpe, Home Sweet Home Improvements, Hoddle and Associates, Inside Nova, Jewel Technical Consulting, Lisa Burnside with Truist Bank, Marianne Clyde with Business Your Way, Mark B. Williams and Associates, Marshall Consulting Group, Meridian Financial Partners, Mountain View Marketing, Nancy D. Green Esquire, Novak, Piedmont Fine Properties, Sherry Goodwin with Jager 2, Smith Midland, Spaces Organized and Styled, Tuesday Lead Share, Updegrove, McDaniel, McMullen, and Chiquetto, and UVA Community Credit Union. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And I would like to say, we have two more programs. Our sponsorship fee for the year is $400 or $100 per program. So if you would like to support the Women's Business Council and the work we do, we are still looking for sponsors. And, you know, obviously you would pay half because half of our programs will have been completed today. If you're interested, get in touch with me, Gloria Williams with Mark B. Williams and Associates, and thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Virginia Ward, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Gloria. It is my pleasure to introduce to all of you today our guests and amazing speakers, Adrian Cole Johnson and Scott Wayne of Envoy. Adrian is an accomplished facilitator, mediator, and speaker. Prior life, she served as a chief of staff in Congress, led community-based programs up to 50,000 people, and has deep experience in building movements in the nonprofit, education, political, and entrepreneurship sectors. Adrian is ensuring voices are heard and issues are moved forward. Scott has worked internationally as a British diplomat. In the private sector, he has built award-winning firms that apply negotiation techniques. Clients understand their market, strategies, and build partnerships to provide stability and fuel growth. Please join me in welcoming Adrian and Scott to the Women's Business Council today. Adrian, Scott.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you.
Hello, Adrian. How are you?
I am good, Scott. How are you?
I'm great. I think it's my job to sort of set the scene for this, right? So
Yes.
firstly, hello, everybody. I want to give some context for why we're here. When this date was made available, I'm actually away on a retreat right now. And I said I couldn't make it. And Adrian said, no, you will bloody well make it because I'm really passionate about these things. So Adrian, do you just want to speak about why we're here and why you're passionate about groups like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know the theme is really kind of looking over the last year and surviving to thrive. So really moving to a thriving mindset when we're looking at the businesses and things that we're running and all of the many hats that we wear. And as I shared briefly earlier, as a woman business owner, as a mom of an 8-year-old who made it through virtual learning, and has managed to do all of the things on top of just, moving forward the business, but also some of the professional connections that I have. I absolutely understand and respect the group that's here in the room. And so we're just excited to be here with you all, share a few nuggets from our experiences that are really diverse and varied. Even as I was hearing what Mrs. Ward shared earlier about Scott's background, but hopefully we can just share some transferable things that may help you all along your path of continuing to thrive in your respective areas.
So on that note, Adrian's back at our studio. I'm in a hotel room right now. Adrian and I work together hand in hand every week on different issues. We work for a firm that's called Envoy. Actually, Adrian has multiple roles. I work full-time for a firm that works for Envoy. We work together on shifting people's perspectives and their behaviors. So to summarize what we as a firm do, I'm going to share a slide. Let's see if this will help us illustrate. We work in an environment where we distinguish between thinking and feeling. So our job is to understand how people make decisions and choices, and then how we shift those for good. So that can be, how do we move people away from cigarettes? How do we get people vaccinated? How do we get kids back in school safely around those emotional barriers that lead to choices? So let me just ask you this question. What do you think of my children? I've got 3 girls aged 13, 10, and 7. What do you think of them? And I'm sort of watching the gallery right now to see your mind is doing right now is it's saying, well, I don't really know what I think of these children. Okay, let me change the question a little bit. Ask you, how do you feel about my children? Okay, now it's entirely different, right? And you can't control what just happened. I shifted the energy in our brain from our logical reasoning, which is a thinking question, to a feeling question, which is the emotional cortex of our brain. And our world is understanding how people feel about issues and then shifting their behaviors towards good. Now, it's remarkable that it still works even when I tell you how it works. And it still works whether or not these 3 kids are my kid, these 3 people are my kids or not. They happen to be my kids, but weirdly it would still work. And these things have enormous consequences for how we make choices. Let me show you this in sort of the deployment of humanitarian issues. And we work a lot with big international humanitarian groups. If I ask you what you think of the conflict in Yemen, and I present information like this, 7.3 million children in need of help, over 500,000 children have been displaced. I'm pushing you back into your rational brain. You're suddenly analyzing if this is a cause that you should support, those sorts of things. But if I present you this image, then you are much more likely to donate and engage on the issue. And it's all tied to how our brains operate, the power of narrative structure, the power of visualization, but more importantly, how we feel about things. And so this whole realm of feeling is an area that we work in, not just to understand how people make decisions, but to help people make better decisions. And that's where the world of social work, which is Adrian's world, and my work of diplomacy come together, because it's all about truly empathizing with where people are, truly connecting with ourselves, and moving people forward. So with your permission, what we're going to do, we've got all kinds of presentations that we know we guarantee would get great success ratings, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to sort of go back and forth in a conversation because you're all zoomed out. There's plenty of TED Talks and books out there that you can watch. So we're just going to go back and forth a little bit. Before we do that, I wanted to put up just a couple of reminders. I'm going to pull up a slide or two. Adrian, while I'm doing that, would you just describe the Richmond night market? Because I think that's a great example of the deployment of feeling versus thinking. Describe that.
It's so interesting. I was showing off my earrings earlier. So the Richmond night market I'm celebrating 10 years this year that we've been in existence, really doing local, highlighting local vendors, whether it's clothing, jewelry, visual art, ceramics. And so what Scott's talking about is, while it's a market, we really go beyond the market, and it's really more than a market, right? And so while of course there's the commerce bit where small businesses are making money and engaging, we also have a big community and creativity component. And so beyond wanting the vendors to have great experiences, we're really looking to build community. And so one of the big questions we had as we were creating it was, how do we want people to feel when they walk into the space? We wanted people to come to the market and stay for a while, visit the restaurants, meet new people. And so using that lens when we created the event and in our business model really allowed us to do some things differently. Something as simple as, how many lawn chairs will we have out, and where will we strategically place them when people are coming to the market? Where do we sit the band at that's on the square, so that people can interact a little bit more? It's family friendly. So what are some of the games? We've got a jump rope out there. We've got some lawn games that are out there too. And so again, going beyond the market, right, and beyond the commerce aspect, how are we really going to build community to make sure that people are staying there a little bit longer? So great thought. I don't often get a chance to talk that out, Scott, but it's definitely a kind of quiet bit of sauce, right, that we have in the effort for the night market.
So all of these things that Adrian's talking about, what an anthropologist would define as symbols, totems, and rituals that give us license to do different things. So today we're going to be talking about how we work on ourselves, but then how you shape the behavior of, in particular, your employees and the businesses that you're leading and organizations that you're running. I will give a slight push to Adrian's venture, because the piece that she didn't mention was where the Richmond night market is. And it's hosted in a space that's called Shockoe Bottom. And Shockoe Bottom in Richmond, Virginia is the location that held, if not the largest, one of the largest markets of enslaved humans. It has a history in a space that is some of the darkest, probably the darkest in American history. And for years, it was plagued by violence, blight, constant attempts at economic regeneration that never got there. And I always believed, being a foreigner coming to that space, was like, it was cursed space. And what Adrian did was to take that and flip it and turn it into a place of not just economic regeneration, but celebration. And it's just the most remarkable thing. And I sort of describe that. That's how we met. And I went to this market. It was the most diverse place I've been in America, was this event. And I said, who's running this? And I approached Adrian and essentially said, we have to work together. At which point she called the police and said, get this strange man away from me. And then over time, we gradually got to know each other and work together. So all I was say, now, as we go into this, let's just talk about this idea of power and powerlessness, and the sense of powerlessness that many of us have been feeling, and the types of things that Adrian and her team are sort of turning on their head. So let's just have a reminder of what power is, because we tend to focus on just one type of power, and there are multiple types of power. And much of the work on this was done by psychologists French and Raven in the 1950s. And we'll throw up a web link. We can share these slides later, so don't worry about taking notes. But of the various types of power that we have, legitimate is the one that we tend to think of: chief executive officer, managing director, president. They are what's called legitimate power that is underpinned by social norms. We understand that we're supposed to sort of follow their direction. We do so through agreement, social agreement. There's also reward power that many of you will have come across, both impersonal, pay raises, promotions, incentives, and personal, just praise and endorsement. Coercion is the opposite of that, and how we can affect people's actual living, but also engage in physical harm, or more likely in your world, emotional humiliation. There's informational power, which many of you will have experienced in your organizations. People have access to information, or it could even be sort of close to social humiliation or encouragement again. And then there are 4 others, which I find really interesting. Referent power are those people who are respected and they have a charismatic power and a presence. Presence is really important, that they just project that authority. Adrian has a ton of this. Then there's expert power, sort of a mastery of a field. And so that often comes, I'm an expert in the field of negotiation. Adrian's an expert in the field of engagement of communities and empathy skills. I'm not an expert in a whole raft of other things, but in that field, I have a power. Then there's channeled power, which is the redirection of legitimate power. You see this in executive assistants, chiefs of staff. We have a fair amount of this in our firm because of the nature of our clients. And then a final one, which is just this moral power of unmovable values, of people who just hold the ground in what they believe in, and they sort of have this halo of authority. My point of presenting this is just a reminder that very few of us are ever actually powerless. It's just the game of power we've decided to play. And I say that to a woman-dominant organization as a reminder not to play the rules that are typically played by men that leans on their existing power. So if we're in a world where there is an over bias of men in powers of legitimate power, apply a different one, apply different sets of rules. The next step to sort of remind you of is that there are multiple types of intelligence. And another thing that men have done, dare I say, probably white men, is define intelligence as being IQ, high ability in logical reasoning or linguistic reasoning. But that's only 2 types of intelligence. And the people who tend to celebrate IQ are the people who have IQ, high IQ, unsurprisingly. So just a reminder, there are at least 9 types. This is the work of Howard Gardner at Harvard. He's a psychologist, to identify different types of intelligence. Musical intelligence, that you understand rhythm and harmony, you either perform or you sing. Visual spatial, a lot of architects and artists have visual spatial reasoning. I don't have a great degree of that. Linguistic and logical are the things we cover in IQ. Bodily kinesthetic, amazing dancers have this type of intelligence. You will see athletes during the Olympics over the next couple of weeks have just the most amazing kinesthetic intelligence. Then interpersonal is the ability to relate to other people, and intrapersonal, the ability to relate to ourselves. And finally, naturalistic, which is how to be in touch with the natural world and understand ecosystems and sort of big picture type things. So when you're talking about the whole theme of these luncheons has been the power series is match your power with your intelligence and push forward. Now today, what we're working on is interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. It's that ability to relate to others, but also somewhat to relate to ourselves. So I'm going to pause there and just see if anybody has any questions. You can post in chat or do a remarkable thing, which is just unmute yourself and speak. I'm just going to pause for a minute. No comments or questions. Nobody's checked out yet. I don't see anybody asleep at their desk, so we're good. Okay. All right, Adrian. Let's just level. Where have people been for the past year and a half?
Wow. You know, whenever I hear that question, I think we've been in so many different places, right? I think even as you're talking about this intrapersonal, I'll start on a personal level. When I think back to, wow, March of last year. So I also work in a pretty large school district in engagement, social work area. And so, you know, we got the notice that we'd just be closed for a week or 2, and then we'd be back. They just wiped down the desk and everything would be back to normal. And then it was the rest of that school year and the school year that just ended too. And so I think for a personal level, I said, well, let me just kind of reset because my whole life is changing. You know, I like to have a little bit of control over things. I'll be honest there. And there was none of that last year. And so as I've shared with Scott, there were 3 R's that really stood out to me, right? So my first R was respiration. Like, I need to catch my breath, right? I was working early and late. I think Scott both say we're hybrid. So we're early birds and night owls too. So again, you're working and you're getting it done. But I said, I need to just like center myself a bit more. So the respiration bit was intentionally slowing down the day, taking a walk around the neighborhood, whether it was 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever I could get, but just making sure that I did something that was really grounding and centering throughout the day. So once I did that and I realized this was not a dream, we're really in this, you know, collective place of kind of maneuvering through a pandemic. I went to reimagining. And so for me, a bit of the reimagining was really about what are the things that are happening in life that I'm loving and this feels really good. But it was also taking inventory of the things where there were opportunities to just do something different. You know, whether it was the way I was leading my team now that was also dealing with the same things that I was, and you know, we all have been. Whether it was, and I'll, you know, a personal share. My husband and I had talked for years about selling the house, but we sold the house. We started getting the house together, sold the house in May, and we're building now, right? But had I not really taken the time to first just stop and really reimagine what we wanted life to look like, you know, as a family, not sure if that would have happened. Um, and then my next R, my last R was really radiate, right? And so once I had done some of this internal work, taking some inventory, what are the things that I really wanted to do a bit more of? Where were the high and kind of glowing points that really brought myself and family the most joy? And really working to intentionally stay in those places, even as we still move through the world, right, in a place that looks really, really new. So I don't know if I answer your question, Scott, but what I will say, I think we've all been in different places. But for me, kind of working myself through that process has allowed me to really be present where I am.
So Adrian, respiration allows yourself to breathe, reimagine, sort of challenge those assumptions about how things are, how they work. And then the third being radiate, just let it out.
Yep, let it out.
I
Yep.
said we were on a team retreat right now. We are, and it's it's officially in our calendars as a strategy retreat. And so our full-time team are all down here at the Tides Inn, and my business partner, I thought we'd have agendas and be working through stuff, and the agenda is for us to sleep. There isn't an agenda. She's just like, you're all beat, like just sleep. And it's interesting. I actually didn't feel it until we stopped, and it sort of hit me like head on, like, well, I'm sure people can relate to this. I was like, oh wow, I almost didn't realize, and we're just running in that adrenaline mode. And I think some of us love that adrenaline mode. And if you're a leader, you can kind of get habitually addicted to it, right? And so it's that untethering. The reimagine, I'm going to post a link to an exercise that we have, which I'll say as a negotiator. So Adrian's will just make sure that they're doing the right thing and in touch with themselves and in touch with communities. My world is to deliver outcomes, and we support clients in taking that understanding about people and shifting their behavior. Now, you can use it for good or ill. I like to think we only use it for good, but you know, there some of those are judgment calls. One of the things I'm noticing though is when I'm coaching leaders is that they're, for want of a better description, many are untethered. And by untethered, I mean they don't know who they are and what they want anymore. And so this was a phenomenon before COVID, particularly in a social media generation where we're surrounded by, you know, the best version of everybody. You know, I joke there's the Instagram version of me, which is perfect and an incredible father and a brilliant leader. And then there's the real version that was spilling coffee on myself 5 minutes ago and tripping over things, right? And so we all have those. So you're surrounded by sort of the competitors, so to speak, or keeping up with the Joneses is not the real version. And then we had COVID, which has really shaken us all. Now, why this matters in a negotiation is that if you don't know who you are and what you want, you're very vulnerable to what we would describe as an ego dangle. An ego dangle is where we dangle something in front of you that plays to your sense of self and will lead you to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. So imagine it's, let's keep it in the corporate realm. Imagine it's a merger and acquisition, and somebody comes and suggests that they want to buy your company. And as part of the package that, you know, the acquiring venture capital unit or wherever come in and say, we're going to give you a really big corner office overlooking the city. You're going to have a private driver, and your business title is going to be, you know, the global vice president of international affairs. And at the time, in the heat of the moment, that emotional transaction, all of this seems really appealing. Now, but if what we need to do is to check that you wanted that in the first place. And if you hadn't done that work to say that you wanted that in the first place, it shouldn't affect the outcome. So this exercise, it's called the life grid, and how it works is just a spreadsheet, and we do it with all of our clients that we're supporting on a negotiation, where it has 4 columns. It's the category of anything you wish, and then the definition of okay, good, and great. And the reason we do this is we have people catalog under any category of what it is they actually want in life. And the reason we don't specify the categories is for you to choose what's important. And so what you do is you fill out the spreadsheets. Let me give you an example. It might be the car that you drive. And I would put acceptable is a beat up old car that I throw my kids and my kayaks in. Good is a reliable SUV, and great is an Audi S7. Okay. Clearly I'm going through a midlife crisis and I want a big German sports car that will counter some of that. Well, just by writing it down, what I do is I sort of ask that question of like, well, do I really want that? Because you're kind of speaking to yourself. And then I realized that actually I don't want an Audi S7 because I have 3 young kids who can destroy a vehicle in fractions of seconds. We're living in the United States with a high performance car. I'm going to break the speed limit all the time, all it's going to do. And I live in the city and I'm going to beat it up. It turns out what I really want to do is to rent an Audi S7 3 times a year. So by doing so, what I've done is just by writing it down, I've sort of called out that actually great isn't owning something, great is borrowing something, and save myself $70,000 of gross income in the process, right? And so it has that, there's less leverage over people the less that you want and the less that you perceive you needing. The other thing it does though, is what I want you to do with this exercise is shade the box of where you currently are. So not only does it suppress what you want, but it shows you where you are and you can work on next steps to move it forward. And success is this. It is not whether you have everything that you want. It's whether you are trending in the right direction. If you're trending in the right direction, chill out, everything's going well. If you're trending in the other direction, it's time to lean on some friends and some colleagues to intervene in sort of where you are. So it's really about grounding ourselves and tethering ourselves, not just in who we are and what we want, but where we want to go. And the categories can be anything. It can be time off. On mine, it's how much alone time I get, whether I'm exercising, all of these things. Now, here's the rule though. I'm gonna send you the link to the file. As soon as you start working on it, you don't share it with anybody, nobody, not even your therapist. Because if you think you're gonna share it with somebody, you're gonna start lying to yourself, right? You're gonna start writing for the Instagram version of you instead of the real version of you. So I'll post the link at the end of the session, and we'll have the chamber send it out as well, along with some slides. But just remember, it's just for you, it's to do the work. And as a Brit, I would encourage you to have a lubricant to your mind. A really good glass of wine helps with this exercise. So there's your license to drink some. All right, so that's about knowing yourself. Once you know yourself, the goal is to know the people you're working with, your customers, your clients, your employees. Adrian, how do we actually empathize with people around us? You know, we've all been on different boats through the storm. Some of us on yachts, some of us on life rafts. We don't know how this has affected people. We don't wear t-shirts saying it. So what are some skills for this group in terms of finding out how their colleagues and employees and co-workers are?
Yeah, great question, Scott. I'm just thinking about the exercise you just introduced. Actually, I should do that for myself. He's always pulling things out. I just love that idea, and really having something that you can go to tangibly write out some of the things that we're often thinking through. So thanks so much for that. You know, and again, they're soft words, but they go so far. You've got to stay connected to your team. Right. You know, I did a lot of reshaping even my team meetings over the last year, because I realized that people needed to be checked on in a personal way, and needed to know that you cared about them, you know. And so I think about even some, high performing, high level, friends and colleagues of mine. And the conversation is, hey, my CEO didn't send a memo out about XYZ. Or there was just a lot of sensitivity about things in the last year or so. And so when I say the word connection, making sure that you're staying connected to your team. One thing that I did differently when we do our biweekly meetings is we open up with the mindful moment. It's literally 1 minute, because of course, we've always got an agenda to go through, right? But it was just the first minute of, sometimes it was silence, Sometimes it was just a wonky question that made people smile, but oftentimes it was a way to get people to kind of loosen up and share a little bit more. Since we weren't in person and didn't have the kind of passing by desk and things of the sort. And I'll tell you, having that moment at the start of our meetings really made a difference. I also look to do that when I did my one-on-ones as well. And then what I find is your team will be more likely to talk a little bit more with you, right? But always making space for connection, not void of the work that has to happen, right? I often talk about impactful compassion and leading with compassion, but still needing impact. Because we're all driving companies and things of the sort. But I think that connection bit is really foundational to making sure that you're just assessing where your team is in order to even encourage and motivate them for the work that will continue. You're on mute. I was waiting for it to happen.
I'm always looking for the mute button. Okay, so in terms of, as we're speaking to a sort of a predominantly women's group, and I do appreciate that you invite men to these sessions, and any smart man would show up to these sessions, but there aren't many smart men, so that explains that formula. But on that note, I do think this sort of checking in with where people are and encouraging yourselves, if you're in a powerful position, to share some vulnerabilities, but especially for the men that you work with who are primed to sort of posture and everything with strength, is to encourage them to open up a little bit. And, you know, in terms of what you can do to shift their behavior, keep in mind two things, is that we are culturally trained to appear strong at all times, but the loneliness rate and the suicide rate amongst men in Western countries is skyrocketing, which shows this sort of self-doubt. And if you're observing a society where you're seeing white men in particular lashing out, it is related to these two dynamics of how they're feeling and how they're feeling threatened. And frankly, I believe, and actually it turns out that Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, look up his video recently, his congressional testimony feels exactly the same, is that white men are feeling threatened. Doesn't mean they're actually threatened, because remember, what we think and what we feel are entirely different things. They're feeling that. And so understand that, don't respect it, because it's not appropriate to be respected, but channel it. And the place that I encourage you to channel it is in encouraging them to share some of their vulnerabilities. It will make it stronger. For those men that you think will lead the pack, I don't find it a sign of weakness at all to say I'm exhausted and I'm really having trouble balancing raising the kids on a custody schedule and doing my job. I don't think that. So find men who don't find that weak, role model it, but then also flip it. So keep in mind is, if you're working with male colleagues who are having trouble with this, translate that to over fake confidence in other roles. And this is where I think it's important for you all. There is a tendency for us to go at things and say we're ready for something when we're not. And there's a tendency for women to hold back if they don't feel fully confident, ready to take a role. And I'm deeply passionate about this. Let me give you an example. Let's say Adrian and I speak at conferences together all the time. And let's say there was a speaker that was supposed to come from the Federal Reserve to talk about the state of the economy. And that person's stuck on a plane. And the event organizer says, hey, can either of you like fill in and give a speech about the state of the economy? I guarantee Adrian will say, I'm not qualified to give that talk. And I guarantee I will say, of course I will. Well, that is going on. Now, somebody's correct. And the person who's correct is Adrian. The person who gets promoted on the stage is me. And we are seeing this organizationally. And COVID, while yes, it's been a burden on all parents, it's been a particular burden because of how society is not yet caught up, particularly a burden on women. And so we're going to see this exacerbated within organizations. And so study men, there's a particularly white men, there's a lot going on right now, but study them as if they're in a petri dish. Don't respect it or feed it, be aware of it, but then encourage yourselves and other women to go for things that they might not quite feel qualified for. Because we'll be leveling out the playing field in terms of that. So checking in on how people are feeling. But then, and Adrian, I want you, what's that phrase you used there about rest but don't stop? Speak to that. I love that.
Oh, the poem, rest if you must, but don't you quit.
Yeah.
That part. Yeah, that we probably all learned as children. And I remember that so often. And even as you talk about kind of traditional trends with men, I'm really thinking about as women, if I can talk generally, sometimes we just get it done. We're so used to getting it done, right? I mean, at work, in business, at home, you're cooking the food, you're planning the dinner, you're helping the husband find out something that's right in front of him. Sorry, had to say that out loud. You know, you're doing so much, right? And so I think what I would say to this group of doers, right, is just you know, knowing when it's okay to not have it all together. I had to really drill that in. You know, I think about my very active 8-year-old. I guess she was 7 when we started, and I'm trying to handle, you know, important meetings. I'm on with our superintendent and our division leadership, but hey, she wants chips, and so she's right. I'm her mom. That's what she's used to seeing me at home, but now it's this blur. And I had to come to a place and say, you know what? I am working. I am at home with my daughter. She needs me. And so then she just became a friendly face that would walk by and say hi. And I had to talk to her about what my expectations were of the job, because normally she isn't seeing it, right? But I use that as an example of just giving yourself some grace as we move things along, as we're still pushing along with goals and impact. Finding that space where you just deserve some grace, and it'll all be okay. And so, but that's the quote: rest if you must, but don't you quit. I tell myself that often, and I believe both. It's not just the don't quit, it's the rest part also. So making sure that we have some intentional time throughout all of the things that are moving, to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, you know, keeping ourselves strong by really taking that rest. You know, I think gives you a big opportunity just to really assess how you're feeling. And then as we're talking about our teams too, you're able to better assess that as well. So yeah.
There's a strategy in there that you might want to borrow, that Adrian's touching on, including her 7-year-old, including Naomi. Sort of by owning that space, it takes away the fear and weakness of trying to cover up. You might remember that BBC News report years ago where the little girl ran into the back of the bedroom and he was trying to disguise it all. Owning that space. So let me give you an example. As I said, we speak at a lot of conferences. You may have noticed I have the big shiny bald head, and on stage lights sometimes there's a reflection from my head. Now, if I try to disguise that fact, then everybody's focused upon the light coming from my big bald head instead of what I'm actually saying. But if I open up and say, hey, everybody, I have a big shiny bald head. The stage lights are very bright. I'm really sorry for those in the front row who are going to be blinded. Everybody laughs. And from that point forward, nobody notices it. Or you'll have seen this before. A speaker has their notes and they drop a note card. If you go, oh, bugger, I dropped my note card, and you pick it up, nobody notices it. If you try to discreetly pick it up, but nobody knows, everybody's watching that show instead of this. And so, Adrian, I hadn't thought about it. You and I both did this with our respective 7-year-olds when we were homeschooling. I would just tell people that Dylan, my little 7-year-old girl, was around the studio and her head would pop up occasionally and people would wave. So just owning that space, suddenly you sort of take a vulnerability and turn it not necessarily into a strength, but you just neutralize it. You just absolutely neutralize it.
Absolutely.
And so it is this, when we talked about the different powers, this referent power is a really interesting one. It's this idea of, you know, in the definition they use charisma, but I don't think it is charisma. I think it's presence. And presence and charisma are very different things. You'll know charismatic people. They can like light up the room, they fill it, and they make good entertainers for talks like this. The trouble with charisma is it's exhausting and it's hard to keep up. And if you're dealing with somebody who has strong charisma, you'll work with salespeople who have a lot of charisma. The way to beat them, the way to do that, is just keep them going because they're exhausted. And the way you can tell whether it's charisma or presence is it's hard for people to keep it up. So hold a conversation when you're in the bathroom, the ladies' room. Hold a conversation in the cafeteria and see how they are with more junior people on the rung. It sort of tells charisma. Presence is much quieter. It's just this grounded sense of knowing oneself and knowing the environment, being comfortable with who they are. And it's hard to nail down, but it's incredibly influential. It's incredibly influential. You'll see this in politicians and leaders across the spectrum. And it's not tied to how smart somebody is. It's tied to what I believe is sort of this congruency, because people are congruent with who they are and what they're trying to achieve. And so really kind of focus on that. and less sort of projecting. And so this whole idea of moving from a survival mindset, we've all had to survive. I thought our business was out of business last year, and there was no hope we were going to make it through. By the grace of the gods, we're here. As we're coming off this adrenaline rush and we're starting to think about thriving, focusing on who you are, what you want to get out of the world, and then just presenting that to the world quietly, confidently, will sort of push open these doors and help push you through them, and then help other people do that. Was it Madeleine Albright's phrase, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women? I mean, do go to heaven instead, just be that rising force lifting up. Adrienne, I'm sort of craving questions, but before we do that, should we see if we can do a quick poll of how people are feeling? Can you do that?
Yeah, let's do a poll, and then I'd love to do some questions too.
Let's see. So if you've got well, you're all on computers, obviously. But if you've got a mobile phone, you can use that, or you can use your computers. I'm just going to put up a quick poll here. Let's see. So if you've got a phone with a camera, you can just put the camera over that QR code and it'll send you to a link, or go to slido.com, slido.com, and put in the code FOKIE, and it will lead you to this question of how are you feeling? And we'll just take a couple of minutes. It's anonymous. We won't know who it's from, but just see if you can put in a few words of how you're feeling. So slido.com, slido.com, and just put in the code FOKIE, and it will lead you to that. Of course, I'm English, so I don't know how you pronounce this word. I pronounce it as the French pronounce it. It's FOKIE to me.
I adore the fact that you're pronouncing it with the French pronunciation. When I first moved here, I said it that way, and it was so wrong. So it's FOKIE.
FOKIE?
FOKIE, but I love that I was right.
Well, if the French are ever right, there you go. That's interesting. Optimistic is sort of gunning down.
Mm-hmm. Because that's how it works, right, Scott? If someone puts in a word more than one time, it gets a bit bigger on the and there's encouraged too.
That's really cool.
Yes, need a vacation. Yes.
Great. I love to see extremely happy. That makes me tired. Yeah. Adrienne, there's two types of tired, right? There's like sleep tired when you just need an hour's sleep, and then there's sort of like emotionally tired and emotionally fatigued.
Yes, drained. Yeah. Because I see sleepy on there too. I get sleepy and tired. Yeah, tired feels different, right? When you talk about thinking and feeling, it definitely feels different. Great responses.
All right.
Brilliant.
Hey, I've got a quick tip around this empathy stuff. When you're trying to see the perspective of others, just keep in mind that we're living in these algorithmic bubbles now. So all of the information that we get is self-reinforced for what we've already said that we like. It sort of works like this. If let's say you're a baseball fan, 10 years ago, if you supported the Washington Nationals, you would have bought a copy of the Washington Post to read an article about the Washington Nationals. And the editor of the sports pages, she would have put, various other articles. Let's say there's an article about Indian cricket next to that article, and you're not interested in Indian cricket, but your peripheral vision picks up on it. You read the article, you learn something about another country, another culture, all those things. Today, when you log on to the WashingtonPost.com to look up the Nationals results, it will never show you that article because you haven't told the algorithms that you're interested in Indian cricket. You don't know you're interested in Indian cricket because you haven't been exposed to it. So we live in this very ironic world where we have access to everything, but we see less and less. And so I believe, especially with the digitization, whether it's the home delivery of groceries, all these things, we're having fewer opportunities to actually interact with things and people that aren't things that we're already interested in. And so we're degrading our skills of empathy, of the ability to see the world, not as you would see it in their shoes, but as you would see it if you were them in their shoes. That's what empathy is. And so you've got to practice it. So, homework is go read things that you're not interested in, watch movies that you don't think you'll like, read a holy book that's not of your faith. Not because we want to convert you from one to the other, just you've got to practice that ability to just see and be as the other. One reason, because it will make you more influential. The other is just giving a damn about others. It's kind of important. There's lots that we can do about this algorithmic world that we're living in. All right. Any questions? Any questions for Adrian and myself?
Great. So anybody who would like to unmute can do that and ask your question. While you are finding your unmute button, I have a question actually. I love this whole presentation. I know you said we didn't need to take notes, but I took them anyway because that's how I roll. Tell me, what are the, because all of us have days that we get up and we're like, I'm so not up for this today. I am surviving today. So how do you, but you know, you're like, okay, I'm surviving, but at the same time, we don't always have the luxury of just surviving that day. Sometimes we really need to be out there and thriving. So what are a few things that you do that help you move from survive to thrive? What are things you can do to kind of jumpstart yourself aside from really, really good coffee?
Adrian,
You go first, Scott.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Mhm.
That means Adrian's got a really good answer. So I think I just own it, and I think it's okay. Now, listen, the social work expert might disagree with what I'm about to say, so be ready for that. But we talked about the power of being congruent and being fully yourself. It's okay to deploy a fake version of yourself to get through the day, as long as you know it's a fake version, right? And so I remember I was going through a really rough divorce. I was going through a divorce. It was a rough time in life, and I needed to be on. And my teammate Kelly, we'd go into meetings or we'd go to presentations, and we'd be in the elevator, and she'd be like, "We need you on now. Like, switch on." All right, so switch on this fake version of myself, and we'd get through whatever it was. Then we get in the elevator again in some skyscraper in New York or LA or wherever it was, and she'd be like, "Okay, you can be off again." I just kind of slump and just go down. And that's not, you can't stay there permanently, but if it gets you through, just know that it's not the real you. Don't tell yourself that you're that thing. It's just a stage face for a while to get you through that day. And then take the time to focus on what it is that's at the core. Is that allowed, Adrian, or is that mentally unhealthy? I'm not sure.
No, I mean, are we healthy? I'm just saying that's another conversation, right? It's so many things that we do to really push through, but I think it's a great question that you asked. So many things came to mind. And I think when I think about how I kind of push through, although I prefer to flow, is to remind myself that we're really on a journey, right? I mean, some days it's like the season. Some days are sunny and some it's a monsoon, right? But it's a continuous journey that we're on. And so I think for me, keeping that in mind, even when something seems harder, helps me to get through the day. It's still a day, right? So kind of again, back to that word optimism, keeping it on the optimistic side. But within that day, again, and I say grace often, but how can I be a bit lighter on myself? So my approach is going to feel a bit different than Scott's. So, hey, if there's a meeting that doesn't have to happen at 8:30, reschedule the meeting. Like that's where I'm at right now, right? If there's some waves in your day that can just help it feel a little bit easier, and you can kick back the next day or a little bit later and feel a bit stronger to move forward. I've been encouraging people to do that. When you talked about, just like I think you mentioned it a bit earlier, Scott, just mental health and things of the sort. I think we have to know what's nice to do and what's necessary to do. I think the other thing that's really important for me is knowing who are my people and what are my things, right? So I know that even if my mom doesn't know what kind of rough day I'm having, I know if I call her, she's going to brighten my day. She's going to say something to me, not even realizing. She just sent me my sister and I a text this morning, out of the blue, positive affirmation. I'm like, Mom, you don't even know how much I needed that word today, right? But she's one of my people. So something I've started to do is, when I'm traveling in between meetings, I'll just call someone not related to business or work, but someone that always puts a smile on my face. And so trying to have some of those intentional spaces throughout. So knowing your people and knowing your things. Y'all, I love to dance. Have not been dancing as much as I want to, but I love music and I love dancing. So I danced with my daughter in the living room a lot last year. Again, just to find those moments of joy. And then the last thing I'll say is, really when we're talking about intentionality, look at that with your schedule too. I am so excited to be taking a vacation the first week of August. The last few weeks are pretty intense. You don't want to see my schedule, but I know I'm working towards something, right? And so, whenever you have opportunities to have some intentionality around that, if you know it's going to be intense, if you know you're in one of those spaces like, oh my gosh, I'm really just holding on, schedule something for yourself, big or small, that's going to seem like a bit of a break between some of the heavier work that I'm sure you all are doing.
And I want to validate that Adrienne really does place those calls. She'll call me every few weeks and she's like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, what do you want? She's like, how are you? Just talk to me. Like it
Yeah.
really transforms people's days.
And you never know. And I'll say, I won't get into our business, Scott, but I checked in on you and on text the other, and it wasn't a call because sometimes I can't call, and I text them like, hey, just checking in. How are you doing? And he was dealing with something. Right? I didn't know what was going to be on the other side of the text because oftentimes it's like, hey, I'm good, it's business. But again, I had a moment. And so I, sent something back and we went on about our day. And so it's interesting, even when you take the time to do that reach out, what the other person may need and how that cycle, goes as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're at time. So I want to just leave people with one last thing. And again, we can share a link to this. It's a communication protocol. But which sounds very grand, but I think this is something to bridge off what Adrienne was talking about that we can all do for each other. Every time ahead of having any communication or any interaction, can be ordering a cup of coffee in the neighborhood coffee shop. Ask yourself, what do I want the person to know? What do I want them to do? And how do I want them to feel? And in business, we're really good at the first two. Actually, in life, we're really good at the first two, and we often drop the third. And so we call it know, do, feel, KDF. So if you're ordering a cup of coffee, I want the barista to know my order, that it's a decaf latte. I want them to make it accurately and efficiently. And then how do I want them to feel? And then you sort of say to yourself, well, actually, I don't really care how I feel. And you're like, well, of course I care how they feel. Like it's 7 a.m. They must have been up at 4 a.m. They've got to be exhausted. They're dealing with this line of uncaffeinated people. And what it leads you to do is to sort of go to the barista and they say, how are you? And you say, actually, I'm fine. And this is my order, but how are you? You've got to be exhausted dealing with this line of people. And their worlds light up not because you're influencing them, but because you care. And what other people see, back to this idea of presence, the people in the line, they feel this thing going on. And suddenly you're shaping the world of everybody's day that's in that space. And it has this sort of magnifying effect. So it's really simple. What do you want people to know? What do you want them to do? And how do you want them to feel? And just pass that around. Do it. Easy. It's free. I think we're fired now, Adrienne. We're going to go back and do something else. These people have businesses to run, organizations to lead.
Yeah. Not fired at all. I would stay on a lot longer just to chat with you guys. There's so much wisdom has been imparted, and really definitely grateful for your time today. I'm going to pass this back to Priscilla to wrap things up. And I'm just going to ask her to unmute.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
You got it.
Gosh, Scott and Adrienne, I just can't thank you all enough. I feel like I kind of just took a break. Just listening to you, I feel better. I don't know. I was exhausted, by the way, and I feel so much better just listening to you all and having you affirm, all of those feelings, and then giving us some great tips. Adrienne, knowing your people, knowing your things. I love that. When Scott first got on and he showed the picture of his girls, he said, how do you feel when you look at this picture? What do you think? And I thought, because my husband and I have 4 girls and he's bald, I thought, well, that's why you're bald. So I just want to thank you very much for saying, know yourself, stay connected to your team. I love the Open with a Mindful Minute. So much great information. We can't thank you enough. So glad we found you. I've got to thank my friend Carter for introducing you both to us. Upcoming events, I'll talk quickly about, and then Gloria will thank our sponsors again, and then we'll adjourn. Our next event is September 15th, and it's all about driving momentum. And our final event is November 17th, and it's all about diversity and inclusion. So you'll be able to register for those events. We'll be sending out more information to let you know. Hopefully we'll be able to get together in person or at least have a viewing party. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Gloria. Final thank you to our sponsors, please.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, Adrian, next time I'm in Richmond and I go there on a regular basis, because I have a daughter who lives there, I'm coming to the Richmond Night Market. I'm really looking forward to that. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alan Wayne Design Studio, Appleton Campbell, Ashwell and Ashwell, Atlantic Union Bank, Be the Change Foundation, Blazer Physical Therapy, Carmen Rivera State Farm Insurance, Country Chevrolet, Discovery Publications, Fauquier Health, Fauquier Times, Genesis Home Improvement, Golden Rule Builders, Gulick, Carson and Thorpe, Home Sweet Home Improvements, Hoddle and Associates, Inside Nova, Jewel Technical Consulting, Lisa Burnside with Truist Bank, Marianne Clyde with Business Your Way, Mark B. Williams and Associates, Marshall Consulting Group, Meridian Financial Partners, Mountain View Marketing, Nancy D. Green Esquire, Novak, Piedmont Fine Properties, Sherry Goodwin with Jager 2, Smith Midland, Spaces Organized and Styled, Tuesday Lead Share, Updegrove, McDaniel, McMullen, and Chiquetto, and UVA Community Credit Union. I said before, if you're interested in sponsoring, contact me, but let me tell you, you can contact anybody in the Women's Business Council and we'll get with you, and we'd be very thankful to have you. Thank you so much, Scott and Adrian. Great. And Priscilla, I'll let you close us out.
Again, thank you, Scott and Adrian. Thank this amazing group of women who signed on today to spend an hour with us. We appreciate you being with us. We hope it brought some value, and we're adjourned. Thank you. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.